that we have built the foundation of what domestic violence looks like, we're going to spend a little bit of time going through different groups and how they're impacted by domestic violence, how they process it, how they heal from it. So today we're specifically looking at youth intimate partner violence. So these are individuals that are 18 and younger for the purposes of this portion of the presentation. So you'll see some statistics up on the screen. Go ahead and take a minute to read through them. So the last three statistics at the bottom of the page really drive home the whole reason behind prevention and outreach efforts to this population. There's a pretty high risk factor for them to be affected by these issues. They're super unlikely to come forward and receive help or seek services, and they're real likely to commit suicide as a result of the experience of sexual assault or intimate. So this is our teen power and control wheel. You've seen a few of these so far. So these issues are just looking at ones that specifically impact teens or impact them in a unique way. So I'm going to highlight the peer pressure one. So we know that this age group is really susceptible to the thoughts and pressures that are put on them by their friend groups, by their classmates. So this can have a huge impact over their relationships and the way they're interpreting the experiences that they're having. So go ahead and take a minute and look at the other possible impacts for teen victims. So now we're going to talk about some of the key issues when you're serving teen victims. So age appropriate and culturally diverse, as well as fully accessible services are necessary to meet the diverse needs of teens that are involved in abusive relationships. So just like the adults that are experiencing these issues, teens come with their own unique set of challenges, the unique ways that they're interpreting what happened to them. And so it's really important that the services that are provided to them are appropriate for their age, for their culture, and that they're easily accessible to that. They face some similar risks and challenges to their adult counterparts, but they have a lot of unique challenges as well. So as an advocate, it's important to be aware of those. Services should be designed to meet their needs, and they need to be comprehensive, and in some situations, long term. So, again, similar to adult victims, it's not necessarily that they can come in, you can give them one thing, and then they're done. A lot of times they're needing support over the long term. And so that's where organizations like Project Hope can really help. State laws, unfortunately, have created a lot of barriers for teens in regards to things like confidentiality, by requiring parental notification, consent to services, as well as mandatory reporting for known and suspected child abuse. So although those laws were meant to protect minors, they're often just creating barriers to services for those teens. Teens may be reluctant to use community services like Project Hope when advocates are outlining their ethical or legal reporting requirements. So when a teen's safety is threatened, services need to be available to them regardless. And so really helping them to understand what confidentiality means and when it does and doesn't apply to them is going to be key for them coming forward and seeking service. So looking at best practices for teens, so a lot of these mirror what we've discussed and what we'll continue to discuss is appropriate for the adults that we serve. So you're not going to get anywhere with a client unless you're taking the time to build a trusting relationship. For teens, something that you need to keep in mind that's special in some ways to their population is the power difference. So remember that in the eyes of the teen, you're an adult. And so an adult, for a child, for a teenager, they've always got more power. They've got the sort of authority to tell that teen what to do. So always being aware of your body posturing, but also the way you're talking to them. We've mentioned a couple of times, and we'll continue to talk about how we are here to empower the clients that we serve, not tell them what to do. Making sure that when you're talking to a teen, that you are phrasing things so that it does sound like it's a decision that they get to make, not a command that you're giving them. Just like with any of our victims, it's important to make sure they understand that they're not to blame for the abuse that they experience. And as an advocate, you need to be honest about the results of the confidentiality or mandatory reporting. So we sometimes have the tendency of, oh, well, I don't want to talk about it because it might scare them away and they may not want to seek services. But the truth is, being honest and open with them is going to help to build that trusting relationship and make them way more inclined to continue seeking service. So if something happens and you have to report, be honest. This is why we like to have that confidentiality talk as soon in that relationship as we can, so that they understand what might happen depending on different things that they. So now we're going to specifically look at age-based barriers that teens face. So these are specific to this population. You're not going to see the adults that we serve facing these same issues. So again, confidentiality is critical. For adults that come in, it's fairly black and white for us, right? In our confidentiality section, we talked about the only time that Project Hope is mandated to report is when we suspect child abuse or neglect. So for adults that are coming in that have no children or that don't have that going on, confidentiality is it's black. It's clear cut. You know that it happens, you know that it's there, you know that we're not going to break it. The teens, unfortunately, can fall so much into that gray area. And sometimes the advocate doesn't know what needs to be reported and what doesn't. And the teen might be afraid that everything needs to be reported. So it really makes it difficult to build that trusting relationship in the first. So some other age-based barriers that exist for teen survivors, required parental notification. So in some circumstances, teen that's coming forward for services, that organization may be required by law to then contact that teen's parents and let them know they came in. So this can be difficult if the teen doesn't want their parents to know, which oftentimes, particularly in sexual assault cases, they don't. They're just looking for help, but they don't want their family involved. Limited access to legal remedies can be another huge issue, and we're going to get into this more in a few slides. General liability issues of working with teens that are unaccompanied. And then there's shelter issues in terms of being able to put them in a safe place. So again, we're going to get more into depth over the next few slides on these issues. We're going to really start with the do we or don't we. So Project Hope specifically, do we or don't we provide services to teens, and where does that confidentiality piece come into play? So we're going to start at the federal level and look at their reporting. So federal legislation provides a foundation for states to build their laws based on how the federal government kind of views the reporting requirements for child abuse and neglect. So federal legislation has identified a minimum set of actions or behaviors that define child abuse and neglect. The Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, defines child abuse and neglect as any recent act or failure to act on the part of an apparent, caretaker, or guardian, which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation, or an act or failure to act that presents an imminent risk of serious harm to that. So, for federal purposes, a child is someone who is under the age of 18 or who is not an emancipated minor. It's important to note that the federal definition of child abuse and the special cases related to withholding or failing to provide medically indicated treatment does not provide specific definitions for other types of maltreatment, such as physical abuse, neglect, or emotional abuse. So it is somewhat limiting in what it covers. So what we're mostly going to be concerned about here is the Colorado reporting requirements, right? The federal ones are sort of the groundwork, but each state sets up their own systems and requirements. So for Colorado, the Colorado Department of Health and Human Services published a position paper on relationship violence. So Colorado adopted that foundation information from the federal government in terms of who qualifies as a child, excuse me. So in Colorado, anyone who's under the age of 18 that's not an emancipated minor is considered to be a child. And we're specifically looking at a act or failure to act for a parent, a guardian, a caretaker. So that's who it's talking about, is that sort of legal guardian for the child. So Colorado Department of Health and Human Services published a paper looking at teen dating violence. And so what they found, or what they stated, was that abuse or assault of a teen that's committed by a dating partner is considered a third-party crime that child welfare would not have the jurisdiction, capacity, or mandate to investigate or adjudicate. If the victim wanted to make a report, the report would be best given to law enforcement. So essentially what this is saying is that in the case of a teen and another teen who are in an intimate relationship, if one of those teens physically abuses the other or sexually abuses the other, that's not a child welfare concern because it's not a parent or guardian who's committing the abuse. So what that means is an organization like Project Hope would not be required to report that abuse to Child Protective Services because it's something that they couldn't do anything with. Now, Project Hope could talk to the victim and help the victim report that crime to law enforcement, but it wouldn't fall under the CPS's jurisdiction. Now, there are a few things that can kind of skew this, but for this specific example, we're looking at two teens that are the same age. We'll get into those kind of iffy areas here in a few slides. So going back to that federal guideline, because it doesn't make a distinction between abuse by a parent or guardian versus a third-party abuse of a minor, the decision to report things like statutory rape committed by an intimate partner as child abuse can now be interpreted as exempt. So again, that just means that for organizations like Project Hope, if it's a teen on teen violence, sexual assault, or domestic violence, we as an organization are not required to make a report. We are exempt from that. There would continue to be two circumstances, however, in which mandatory reporting would be required. So these are really important to note. So if the parent or guardian of the teen was aware of the abuse and aided that abuser in some capacity, either by just blatantly ignoring it, continuing to put their child in that circumstance, then that would be something that we would need to report on. So if the teen comes in and their parents know nothing about what's been happening, then we wouldn't. The second thing that we would need to continue to report on, or the second circumstance we would have to continue to report on, is if the teen's partner is someone who's in a position of trust. So if the teen comes in and tells us that they're dating their softball coach and their softball coach physically or sexually assaulted them, we would need to make a report. One thing that I really want to clarify and emphasize here is that these circumstances are not a dating relationship. The teen may say that those two are dating, that them and their softball coach are dating. The softball coach might even say that they're dating. But if you look at consent and all of those other issues that we've talked about so far, we know that that's not the case. It's a manipulation on part of the softball coach to be having inappropriate relations with a younger individual. In order to have a consensual relationship, the power needs to be the same, and it's never going to be the same between a child and an adult. The adult is always going to wield more power in that relationship. So for those two circumstances, Project Hope would have to make an official report. So the last kind of piece of advice that the Colorado Department of Health and Human Services issued was that an organization that chooses to provide services to teens needs to have clear policies regarding how those services are provided and when reports are going to be required. So again, that's the whole reason for this really long training, why we constantly talk about confidentiality, because we really want to make sure that you all understand. So if you're engaging with a teen survivor, you know how Project Hope requires you to handle that. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears slightly and we're going to look at how teens come in for services. So it's important to remember that teens are always cautious about seeking help. So oftentimes they're making contact with Project Hope or another organization like ours through anonymous means. So they may send a message through Facebook or through the website. They may call the crisis line or text the crisis line. So these are ways for them to kind of feel out what services might be available without giving a lot of information about the circumstance. Oftentimes, we've seen for Project Hope that parents are the ones that are making first contact. So their child was sexually or physically assaulted. Oftentimes, it was quite a while ago, and somehow it came to the parents' attention. They just learned about it, and now they're really determined to seek services for their child. They may have taken the child over to law enforcement or the Department of Health and Human Services, who may have referred them to us, or they may have just come straight to us. Those situations can be really difficult because the child is not coming forward and seeking services for themselves. So they're less likely to engage. Now, if they're really young, they don't have as much choice. But for those teen victims, they're sort of getting drug into Project Hope to meet with somebody and to talk about this terrible thing that happened to them. It's an uphill battle for you as an advocate to really get that individual to engage. And so this goes back to that whole building trust and building rapport. In those circumstances, it is really important that we try to not have the parent in on those meetings. You might have to occasionally have the parent and child in the same meeting, but we really want the child to be driving the direction of the services. And if mom or dad or whoever is in the room with them, that adult is going to be taking charge and telling you as the advocate what you need to do or telling the child what they need to do. And that's not as effective. Oftentimes, the parents in these circumstances are what we consider secondary victims. So they may be in need of services as well. Typically, counseling is the big one. So in those circumstances, they would be a client, not our primary client, but they would be a secondary client. We would want that parent to have a different advocate than the one their child has. Sometimes this is not possible. In our organization specifically, we are a really small staff. But if you can have separate advocates, then the one advocate who's working with the child is less likely to end up having to play the middleman. If that advocate is working with both the parent and the child, they may be getting pulled back and forth, receiving conflicting information, and really kind of painted as the person that needs to deliver bad news to the child. So the parent may be using that advocate to try to make the kid do something they don't want. So then the last group that might possibly reach out on behalf of a teen would be other concerned professionals. So this could be counselor, a teacher, a coach, someone from church, someone else in that child's life that cares about their well-being and has noticed behaviors that are concerning and is reaching out for assistance. Okay, so now we're going to take a peek at rights of a minor. So this is specific to Colorado. So I'm going to give you a minute to go ahead and read the screen in front of you. Okay, so a couple of things that I want to emphasize here. Colorado law specifies only that minors 15 years or older can consent to their own mental and medical services, including substance abuse treatment. Advocacy services, however, are not addressed, so it leaves it to the organization to determine for themselves the age that a minor can be self-consenting. So essentially what this is saying is that an organization like Project Hope has to decide at what point a teen can come in for services and be considered an adult. So for Project Hope, we use the age of 15. So if a 15-year-old comes in, we treat them as an adult and we would provide them services as an adult in a confidential manner as long as the person abusing them wasn't in a position of power and the parents of that child did not aid in that abuse. So advocacy services, we have to make sure to distinguish that the services provided by Project Hope, they're not counseling services. So once you introduce that whole counseling realm, then there's other components that come into play. So we are not counseling services, we are advocacy services. And a child who's 15 or older can come in and receive services without needing the notification of. All right, so now we're going to take a look at something called the Title 19 Children's Code. So I'm going to give you a minute. Please read the information on the screen. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at legal remedies. So the justice system represents only one component of a coordinated community approach to serving teens. It's an important piece, but it's not the only one. So for teen victims, just like any of the other clients we serve, having that wraparound approach, so various service providers coming together to support that victim is going to be way more effective than one organization addressing or attempting to address all of their concerns. So Colorado law does not include age definitions other than special protections for children or elderly individuals. So domestic violence laws can apply to minors that are committing offenses. So a minor does have the ability to file for a protection order as a victim. If they're under the age of 18, however, a parent or guardian is going to need to fill out the paperwork on behalf of the teen. If that individual, that parent or guardian is not available, then another adult may be able to submit on a teen's behalf, but you would have to check with the individual county court for each area. They're going to do it a little bit differently. As far as who you're able to take a protection order out against, so you cannot obtain a protection order for a child that's a protection order against, excuse me, a child who's under the age of 9, which is pretty crazy to think about. So now we're going to look at the age of majority. So this has to do with a minor contacting an attorney for legal services. This is essentially the age at which they're considered to be an adult. So for Colorado, we have determined the age of majority to be 18. Individuals are treated as adults in every aspect at that time. There are a few exceptions still, things like renting cars, drinking, or getting a hotel room. At the age of majority, a parent is no longer liable for their child's actions, and the child all of a sudden has rights that they didn't have before. Things like being able to enter into legally binding contracts, managing estates, sue or be sued, making decisions about their body, voting, joining the military, that sort of thing. An emancipated minor may be able to seek legal services and enter into a legally binding contract. However, given the age of majority, a minor would most likely have to have parents secure services on their behalf. So if you think about needing a protection order or having to go through a court case for a sexual assault, it may not be possible for a child to obtain legal counsel or legal assistance without having a parent or guardian helping them. So this can create a slew of problems. They may have a not so great home life. So maybe the parents themselves are abusive in some capacity. And so then you're leaving the child with not being able to, or having more struggles to face in order to seek services, seek legal services. The parent or guardian, they may just be uninvolved, or maybe they don't know about the situation and the child really doesn't want to bring them in. So there's a lot of barriers in order for that kid to be able to get the services that they need. And just because they're emancipated doesn't mean that they're still able to get them. Some lawyers may continue to refuse to work with them until they're 18. As far as liability issues, so organizations that are working with teens or children may need additional types of insurance, which can be very expensive. So smaller organizations like Project Hope might have a harder time being able to provide. You then have issues with shelters, so things like harboring a minor. Essentially, what this means is that any shelter in Colorado that houses a minor without their parents for longer than 24 hours is required to have special license. So if a kid came to Project Hope today and said that they were fleeing from an abusive partner and an abusive situation, whatever it is, and they were wanting a place to stay, we would be unable to accommodate them without that special license, which is extremely expensive to get. Only a handful of places in the state have them. Um, and then there's a whole slew of additional issues that go along with that. So Colorado law requires parental consent for any stay that's longer than 24 hours. If you're providing shelter to a minor without that consent, if law enforcement comes forward and is asking where that child is and you're failing to provide that information to law enforcement, or you're preventing them from being able to find the child, then you can be charged with this harboring a minor. For organizations that are that do have that special license to allow kids to stay, they're only allowed to be in that facility for up to 2 weeks from the time of intake. So essentially, you're setting up these children to be homeless, right? So they find a safe place to stay at one of these shelters that is able to put them up for more than 24 hours, but they can only stay there for 2 weeks and then they have to leave. So if they can't find another place to stay, which they may not be able to, they're then forced to be living on the street. There are a lot of different reasons why returning home may not be an option for them. So although this law was sort of meant to help protect children, in a lot of ways it's actually just setting them up to be taken advantage of or abused further. So let's talk safety planning. Safety planning needs to be considered for teens, just like our adult victims, even if they don't choose to leave their abusive partner. By helping the teen to plan ahead, they're going to be better equipped to navigate dangerous situations while decreasing the risk of physical harm to themselves. Changes can be small and are catered to each individual. They may include things like relocating to a new school or home, which is kind of on the extreme side, or they could be simple acts like changing a password on their social media or email accounts, getting a new phone number, or taking a different route to school or class each day. Safety planning can help teens end their relationship when they're ready to do so and do it in a safer manner. For teens, technology is a huge conversation to have with them. Social media has become a big weapon of dating violence. It allows someone to stalk, control, threaten, or humiliate a victim. It also gives them the ability to call or text constantly to exert control over a victim. It's important to talk to a teen about calling the police. This can be a scary option for the teen, but it could mean the difference between injury or death for them. So we as Project Hope cannot help address an imminent danger. We could certainly put them in shelter, but if something's happening that's endangering their life, that's not something that we're equipped to handle. Law enforcement would need to do that. So having that conversation with them and helping them get comfortable is important. To prepare a safety plan, a teen should involve other people. They shouldn't be the only ones that know about it. If they don't have a trusted friend or family member that they feel comfortable with, then you as their advocate would be the next best option. But having others know of the plan will help increase safety for the teen, as well as accountability for the victim and helping them stick to the plan. So, as teens transition from middle or junior high to high school, friendships and peer groups are often taking priority even over family relationships. It's a natural phase of separation from their parents at this point in time, and they're experimenting, they're kind of getting to know a little bit more about their likes and dislikes, their personalities, that sort of thing. New findings have shown that parts of the brain that are responsible for functions such as self control develop during the teen years. So there is benefit in those experimentations and them kind of figuring out what their limits are. So this might help to explain certain teen relationship behaviors such as poor decision making as well as emotional outbursts. Healthy teen relationships can positively influence their ability to make safe and good decisions when pressured to engage in adolescent risk behaviors, things like sexual activity, alcohol or drug use, or violence. Teens who learn to develop healthy relationships are more likely to have healthy relationships throughout their lives. So this is really the foundation of how the rest of their relationships will go later on. If they're able to form healthy, nurturing relationships with their peers or significant others at this point in life, then those relationships are going to most likely continue to be healthy as they age. So the question there at the bottom is, where do teens learn about healthy relationships? So their parents. Teens learn how to act in relationships from parents, siblings, friends, and the media. Parents should provide reliable and accurate information to their teens about what a healthy relationship feels like, looks like, and sounds like. Parents need to talk about those relationships, but they also need to listen to their teens talk about what they think healthy or unhealthy relationships look like. One of the most effective ways of teaching a teen about healthy relationships is modeling those positive relationships. Because even though you may think that the teen is not listening or watching, they often are. Parents play a critical role in providing a good example and teaching teens the importance of healthy relationships. They need to help their teens recognize and discuss the full range of emotions that connect one person to another. Without emotions and awareness and understanding of them, it's difficult to build or maintain strong and healthy relationships. It's important to encourage a teen's emotional awareness, the ability to recognize moment to moment emotional experiences, and to express those experiences and feelings. Another place that teens learn about relationships is peers. So having a risky peer group, so for example, where peers are victims or perpetrators of bullying, physical violence, cyberbullying, will actually increase the risk of victimization and or perpetration of teen dating violence. So teens who experience dating violence often seek help from their peers before they'll go to anyone else. So their peer group can really discourage the victim from seeking further help. If they maybe had a bad experience with their significant other and they go to their friends the next day and talk about it, and their friend tells them, "Oh, that's no big deal, all relationships are like that," or "Oh, he must love you so much." Those kind of comments are going to make the teen normalize the behavior. So they're not going to see anything wrong with it. They're not going to tell their family members. They're not going to reach out to a counselor or an organization for help because they think that that's just the way relationships work. Programs that have been focused on social context have had some positive effects for preventing teen dating violence. So they've brought in prevention efforts to schools, and they've shown that if they're targeting a wide range of behaviors, then they're actually able to address the teen dating violence. So they could go in and they could just talk about um, tardiness or skipping class. And if they're able to fix those types of behaviors, they've actually found that it then influences the likelihood that teens are engaging in bullying or teen dating violence or sexual abuse. So they're all kind of connected for the teen. So another place that teens learn about relationships is the media. So people suspect that media, whether news reports, songs, or movies that teens view or listen to, as well as interactive media like video games, can contribute to teen dating violence. Various types of media have different messages, though. So that's the important piece to remember about this, is that not all media that's out there is actually negative. There are some that are positive or that have been used to send anti-violence through PSAs, song lyrics that urge respect, video games where it pays to have a conscience. Those can all contribute to attempts to surround teens with valuable and positive models. So you'll see a link here called blank spaces. Look in the comment box below and go ahead and click that link. It is a music video. Taylor Swift. I'm sorry if that's not your type of music, but please watch the video. And there are a series of questions on the quiz regarding the video that you'll need to complete. So go ahead and pause the YouTube video and click on that link below to watch the music video. When you're done, you'll come back to this slide. Welcome back. We're going to end this section with a couple of activities. The first one, which will span over the next 3 slides, we are going to focus on an example from media of how teen relationships are depicted. So we're specifically looking at the movie Twilight, or the series Twilight. This is an older set of movies, but it does a really good job of demonstrating how the media often depicts teen relationships and how those unhealthy characteristics are oftentimes portrayed as romantic and desirable. If you are not familiar with the books or the movies, I'm going to give you just a real brief background so you understand what we're getting into. So Twilight is focused on the story of a female teen named Bella who moves to a new town where she meets a vampire named Edward who's posing as a teenage boy. No surprise, they fall in love, and of course there's danger, adversity, and rivals trying to keep them apart. So here's how the next few slides are going to work. There are 1 to 2 video clips on each slide. You will find the link for those video clips in the comments box below. You will need to click on each link and watch it, and then there will be a series of questions on the quiz that you will need to answer relating back to each of those videos. The videos have all been titled. You will see those titles in the slides, in the comments, and on the quiz. So that should help you keep track of which one's which. So you will click on each video, watch it, you can complete the quiz questions, and then go ahead and come back to this YouTube video to move on to the next slide. Please keep in mind that for the couple of slides, there's not going to be a whole lot of talking going on, but on the last slide, I will give you a little bit of a wrap up and recap of the video. So at this point in time, go ahead and pause this YouTube video and click on the link below titled Twilight Movie Clip. All right, welcome back. We are on the second slide of this activity. So there are 2 clips here. These ones are focused more on Bella. So we have the first clip, which is called Dangerous Love, and the second clip, which is called Goodbye. So at this point in time, go ahead and pause this video. Click on the links below. You will need to watch both videos, and then go ahead and complete the questions on the quiz before coming back to this video. We are now on our final slide for this activity. So these are the last 2 video clips. These ones are focused on Edward. They're titled, I Like to Watch You Sleep and Stay Away. So you're going to go ahead and pause this video and click on the links below to watch the attached clips. When you come back to this video, we will do a recap of all of the clips so far. All right, welcome back. So hopefully you see the point of these exercises through the video clips that you watched. Please remember that you need to complete the questions on the quiz for each video. There are a few things that I just want to bring your attention to. So Bella is displaying a lot of different traits that are typical of victims of relationship violence. You'll notice things like her low self-esteem. She really doesn't think that she's worthy of Edward and kind of views herself as beneath him, which sets her up to be a perfect victim for Edward to take advantage. If you look at Edward, he is displaying things like violent outbursts. So at one point, he tells her that he'll kill anyone that comes near her. This is viewed as romantic, and she views it as he cares so much about her that he's willing to protect her. But it is a very controlling tactic on the side of an abuser. So why are these vampire movies or books so popular? So since the Victorian age, vampire legends have been part of pop culture. They emphasize forbidden desires, illicit sexual metaphors, and adventure. But unfortunately, they also include messages that support sexism and the abuse of power. So these movies, they're really popular with teens, but they demonstrate so many unhealthy characteristics inside of a relationship. So a teen that doesn't have a good parental connection, a good peer group, that's maybe looking to the media to figure out how their relationships should look, they're being set up to be taken advantage of, abused as a victim in that relationship, or they're being set up to perpetrate abuse in their relationship. So there are a lot of different prevention factors that can help with teen dating violence. We've talked about these before, but this slide just really quickly reemphasizes them. So I'm going to give you a minute. Please read the contents of this slide. Our final activity is looking at teens and word usage versus meaning. So we're going to examine how the language we use demonstrates acceptance of violence in our culture, knowingly or not. The emphasis here does lean towards sexual violence, but keep in mind that these words and phrases can also be applied to dating violence. Even when used with casual, harmless intent, the language our society invokes on a daily basis perpetrates violence. How many times have you emerged from an exam and heard or exclaimed, "Wow, that test totally raped me"? By using language that normalizes the existence of sexual violence, the violence that pervades in our society is encouraged. The occurrence of rape, sexual harassment, and mutilation is maintained through certain social situations, behavior patterns, and individual actions. For example, when a guy refers to his friend as a pimp, he is inadvertently commending the actions of an individual who succeeds through physical and sexual domination. When women use the words like slut or whore as terms of endearment for their female friends, it's sending the message to society that women don't mind being labeled with such objectifying terms, which then just encourages their use. Language acts as a catalyst for sexual violence in other ways. On college campuses, sexually degrading terms are used as frequently as beer bong on game day, excessively and without question. By deeming women sluts, whores, or bitches in both sexual and non-sexual contexts, our society normalizes patriarchal values and gender inequality. When a woman is called a slut, she is dehumanized and objectified, two of the driving forces behind sexual violence. What's more, if a woman is labeled as slut, it is presumed that she is always up for sexual acts, and her consent is deemed unnecessary, which of course is never the case. In the event that a woman is raped, people often blame the woman for being promiscuous, arguing that she's just crying wolf or feels bad for being such a slut, instead of blaming the rapist for the assault. This not only leads to a very hostile environment for a victim seeking help, that also implies that a woman is doing wrong by having sexual partners. The normalcy of language that connotates sexual objectivism and disrespect uncovers society's seemingly casual stance against violence. In addition to society's employment of sexually violent and degrading terms, the words we use to describe the physical act of sex are also destructive and convey sex as an individual act that someone does to another person. The words like nail, bang, screw, or fuck. These words do not represent the mutual respect that belongs in a healthy, consensual sexual. All right, so our next activity is going to look at word usage. So I'm going to provide you with the instructions verbally on this slide, and then you'll go ahead and head over to the quiz and complete the exercise. When you're finished, please make sure you come back to this video as there are a couple of slides left for this section. So language is an extremely powerful tool that can be used to empower or oppress. Our language is full of commonplace violent phrases that people rarely think about when they're using it. Examples of this are give it a shot or when push comes to shove. So for the quiz for this activity, you're being asked to compile a list of phrases, of violent phrases that you have heard or even used yourself. Come up with as many as you can and try to do it inside of a 2-minute window. After you've compiled your list, there will be a series of questions on the quiz that you'll need to respond to regarding your list. We want to see a lot of different phrases, so please really think about this. Don't just list one or two. So go ahead and head over to your quiz. You'll want to pause this YouTube video, but please make sure you come back to finish this. So we are going to wrap up this section by looking at social and emotional learning. So this is essentially defined as the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain positive relationships, making reasonable decisions. Teen dating violence prevention is engaging in social and emotional learning. It's an opportune moment to provide skills and resources related to teen dating violence and relationships. So they really tie together when you're trying to do prevention efforts. So we need to remember that relationship education and teen dating violence is also about the individual that's experiencing the issue. We can use this to help encourage self-awareness as well as emotional management, help them define values, establish boundaries, and identify, resources and information. Teens who have been abused often hesitate to seek services because they don't want to expose themselves or they're unaware of the laws that are surrounding domestic violence. So we can use these prevention efforts as ways to really educate them on how they can come forward and seek services and support for the abuse that they experience. So this is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure that you complete your quiz. Thank you.